There are moments in a criminal empire when the biggest threat isn't the police, it isn't the mafia, and it isn't even an enemy gang. Sometimes the biggest threat is one mistake made by one of your own men. And in episode 7 of The Westies, that mistake could be enough to tear the entire organization apart. The episode is called A Boy Made of Trouble, and judging by everything that has happened so far, that title is more than just a warning, because the Westies are already standing on unstable ground. Sweeney wants control. Roarke wants opportunity. Keenan wants evidence. The FBI wants a way inside. And Bridget is becoming trapped inside a mission where even she isn't completely sure who she can trust. But now, one of the Westies gets busted, and suddenly all those separate problems begin crashing into each other. Before we get into episode 7, we need to remember where the story stands. The Westies have survived by understanding one simple rule. They are surrounded. The Italians have more people, more money, more connections, more power. So Sweeney has always understood that the Westies cannot afford an open war. Their real strength is control, fear, and knowing when to make a deal. But Roarke represents something different. He is younger, more ambitious, and increasingly willing to take risks. That difference has been growing throughout the season, and now it is finally becoming impossible to hide. Earlier in the story, Sweeney allowed Roarke to get involved with cocaine, but with conditions. The problem was that cocaine brings money quickly, but it also brings attention, and attention is exactly what the Westies don't need, especially with John Gotti and the Italian mafia already watching them. Then came Roarke's disastrous deal. He borrowed money from Ruby Stein to finance a cocaine operation involving a wealthy young buyer from downtown. It looked like the kind of deal that could transform Roarke's position. Instead, the deal collapsed, and when a criminal deal collapses, somebody has to pay. That failure creates the perfect environment for episode 7, because now Sweeney has another reason to question Roarke, and Roarke has another reason to believe Sweeney is holding him back. Then there is Glenn Keenan. On the surface, Keenan is part of the FBI investigation, but he is walking a dangerous line. He has to get close enough to the Westies to learn the truth. At the same time, he has to convince Sweeney that he is useful. And Agent Polk is pushing him harder. She wants results. She wants information. And eventually, she wants Sweeney. Now one of the Westies has been arrested. That changes everything, because an arrest isn't just an arrest. It creates fear. Who talked? Who knows? Who is next? And most importantly, can the arrested man be trusted to keep his mouth shut? That is where episode 7 begins to tighten the noose. Sweeney cannot afford weakness. Roarke cannot afford another failure. And Keenan finally has something he can use. But what happens next changes everything, because Keenan isn't simply investigating the Westies anymore. He is beginning to understand exactly how to manipulate them, and that may make him more dangerous than any gunman on the street. The most dangerous organizations aren't destroyed from the outside. They collapse from the inside, and episode 7 pushes the Westies directly toward that collapse. The arrest gives Keenan leverage. For weeks, he has been trying to get close to Sweeney, but Sweeney is careful. He doesn't trust easily, and he certainly doesn't trust outsiders. So Keenan needs something valuable, something Sweeney cannot ignore. The arrested Westie becomes exactly that. Keenan can use the case to pressure Sweeney, and this is where the FBI strategy becomes much more interesting. Keenan doesn't necessarily need Sweeney to confess. He doesn't even need Sweeney to admit everything. He just needs Sweeney to react, because reactions reveal relationships. If Sweeney protects someone, that person matters. If Sweeney abandons someone, that person may be expendable. And if Sweeney becomes angry, Keenan learns where the pressure points are. Meanwhile, Bertie Polk is watching. She has already been pushing Keenan to go further. She wants him to get closer to Sweeney, closer to the organization, closer to the truth. And now Keenan finally has an opportunity to prove himself. But there is a problem. The Westies aren't stupid. They know the police are watching. They know the FBI is interested. And they know that an arrested criminal can become a liability. So Sweeney has to make a choice. Protect one of his own, or protect the entire organization. That is the kind of decision Sweeney has been making throughout the series. And every time he makes one, somebody pays the price. This is also where the conflict between Sweeney and Roarke becomes much more dangerous, because their disagreement isn't really about one arrest. It is about the future. Sweeney believes survival comes first. Roarke believes opportunity must be taken when it appears. Sweeney sees the bigger picture.
Roarke sees the immediate prize, and neither man completely understands how far the other is willing to go. That difference has been building quietly. Now it begins exploding into the open. Imagine the pressure inside that room. One man has been arrested. The FBI is circling. The Italians are watching. The cocaine operation has already gone wrong, and everybody knows that one bad decision could start a war. Yet the Westies still have to behave like everything is under control. That is the tragedy of criminal power. The more powerful you become, the more people depend on you. And the more people depend on you, the more secrets you have to carry. Then we get to Mickey Flanagan. Flanagan has always been one of the more unpredictable figures in this story. His return to the Westies already created complications. But episode 7 turns the attention toward his personal life. And this matters, because crime doesn't stay outside the house. Eventually, it follows you home. Flanagan's personal world begins to unravel. The exact details of how this plays out should be watched closely in the episode, because this storyline adds something the gunfights and criminal deals cannot. It shows the cost. The Westies may think they are building power, but people around them are paying the price. Families suffer, relationships break, trust disappears, and men who believe they control everything eventually discover that they cannot control the people closest to them. And while Flanagan's world starts falling apart, Bridget is moving deeper into hers. Her mission involving Cahill and the IRA has become increasingly complicated. At first, Bridget seemed to know exactly what she was supposed to do, but now Cahill's motives are becoming harder to understand. And that is dangerous, because Bridget is no longer simply completing a mission. She is beginning to question the person giving her the mission. And when you start questioning the person who controls the operation, you are already in danger. No one expected what happens next, because the deeper Bridget goes, the harder it becomes to tell who is using whom.
By this point, the Westies has made one thing very clear. Nobody is completely innocent. But more importantly, nobody is completely in control. Sweeney thinks he is protecting the Westies. Roarke thinks he is building his future. Keenan thinks he can infiltrate the organization. Polk thinks she can control Keenan. Bridget thinks she understands her mission. And Cahill may have motives that go far beyond what Bridget has been told. That is what makes episode 7 so dangerous. Every storyline is now connected by secrets. Let's start with Sweeney and Roarke. Their conflict is becoming personal. Sweeney sees Rourke's ambition as dangerous. Roarke sees Sweeney's caution as weakness. And once two leaders inside the same criminal organization start thinking that way, the organization itself becomes unstable. The Westies have always survived because they presented a united front. But what happens when that front disappears? What happens when younger members start choosing Roarke? What happens when older members continue following Sweeney? That question becomes even more important because we already know where the season is heading. The next episode is called The Irish Goodbye, and its official synopsis says the fallout between Roarke and Sweeney will split the Westies, with the old guard facing the young. That means episode 7 is not just another chapter, it is the pressure chamber before the explosion. Everything happening here is pushing the organization toward that split. The arrest, the cocaine problems, the FBI investigation, the distrust, the generational conflict, they are all connected. And Keenan understands this. That is why the arrested Westie is so important. Keenan doesn't necessarily need to destroy the Westies himself. He just needs to push them until they destroy their own unity. And Polk understands that too. She wants Keenan to earn Sweeney's trust, because once Sweeney trusts him, Keenan can hear things he was never supposed to hear. He can learn names, locations, relationships, deals, and weaknesses. But there is another layer. Keenan is not only fighting the Westies, he is fighting his own conscience. The deeper he goes undercover, the more difficult it becomes to separate his job from his personal feelings. That has already been affecting his relationship with his son, and episode 7 continues that emotional pressure. This is what makes Keenan interesting. He isn't simply a cop hunting criminals. He is a man trying to stop criminals while watching his own life fall apart, and the Westies exploit exactly that kind of weakness. Meanwhile, Bridget's story becomes increasingly mysterious. Cahill's motives are starting to blur, and this raises one major question. Is Bridget carrying out Cahill's mission, or is Cahill using Bridget for something she doesn't fully understand? The IRA storyline also adds another dangerous dimension to the episode, because while Sweeney and Roarke are fighting over control of the Westies, Bridget is dealing with a completely different kind of war, one built on loyalty, politics, revenge, and ideology. And that makes her situation especially dangerous, because in a criminal organization, you can sometimes negotiate with greed, but ideology is harder to control. A person who wants money can be bought. A person who wants power can be negotiated with.
But a person who believes they are fighting for a cause may be willing to sacrifice everything. That is the danger surrounding Bridget. And then there is Flanagan. His personal life unraveling is more than a side story. It reflects the central theme of the entire series. The Westies believe violence gives them control, but every violent decision creates consequences somewhere else. A man wins a street battle and loses his family. A leader protects his organization and loses the loyalty of his men. A cop gets closer to the truth and loses his connection with his son. Everybody wins something. Everybody loses something. And that is why the title, A Boy Made of Trouble, feels so appropriate. Trouble isn't just coming from one person. Trouble has become the entire system. Now we reach the most important part of the story. Not because episode 7 necessarily gives us every answer, but because it puts the characters in position for the final confrontation. The Westies are no longer one united group, not emotionally, not strategically, and soon perhaps not at all. Sweeney wants order, Roarke wants opportunity, Keenan wants evidence, Polk wants results, Bridget wants to complete her mission, Cahill wants something that Bridget still doesn't completely understand, and Flanagan is struggling to keep his personal life from collapsing. Every character is moving in a different direction, and that is exactly how organizations fall apart. The arrested Westies becomes the spark. Sweeney has to respond, Roarke has to decide where he stands, Keenan gets the leverage he has been waiting for, and Polk sees an opening. But the most important question isn't simply, will the Westie talk? The bigger question is, what will Sweeney do if he does? Because if Sweeney believes the man can expose the organization, he may have to make another impossible choice. And we already know what Sweeney is capable of when he believes the survival of the Westies is at stake. He has killed before to maintain control. He has sacrificed relationships before. He has chosen the organization over individual lives. So the audience is left wondering, who will he sacrifice this time? And that question makes the confrontation with Roarke even more important, because Roarke may no longer be willing to accept Sweeney's decisions. The younger generation has grown tired of the old rules. They want money, they want power, they want a future, and they don't want to spend their entire lives waiting for Sweeney to decide when it is safe to move. That is the real conflict. It isn't old versus young simply because they have different ages. It is old thinking versus new ambition. Sweeney believes survival is the victory. Roarke believes expansion is the victory. And history tells us what happens when those two philosophies collide. The organization fractures. And once the Westies fracture, their enemies don't have to defeat them. They only have to wait. That brings us back to Keenan. Because Keenan's greatest weapon isn't his badge. It is patience. He doesn't need to rush. He can allow Sweeney and Roarke to fight. He can allow the organization to become suspicious of itself. He can let fear spread. Then he simply watches. And every argument gives him information. Every arrest gives him leverage. Every mistake brings him closer to the truth. But there is one problem. The closer Keenan gets, the harder it becomes to remain emotionally detached. And that is where his storyline becomes tragic. Because undercover work isn't only about fooling criminals. Sometimes you start fooling yourself. You begin to believe you belong there. You begin to understand the people you're investigating. You begin to see their reasons. And once that happens, the line between investigator and participant becomes dangerously thin. Then there is Bridget. Her storyline could become one of the biggest turning points heading into the finale. Cahill's motives are becoming unclear. Bridget is pushing deeper into the mission. And the more she discovers, the more she may realize that she doesn't know the entire plan. That is the classic danger of being useful to someone. They tell you enough to make you obey, but never enough to make you independent. And if Cahill has been keeping Bridget in the dark, then the truth could be devastating. The episode therefore becomes less about one criminal arrest, and more about a collection of secrets finally colliding. Sweeney versus Roarke, Keenan versus Sweeney, Polk versus the entire Westies organization, Bridget versus the unknown motives of Cahill, and Flanagan versus the consequences of the life he has chosen. By the end of this chapter, the Westies are standing at the edge of something much bigger. And the most frightening part? The enemy doesn't necessarily need to attack. The Westies may destroy their own unity first. That is why episode 7 matters. It isn't simply setting up another crime. It is setting up a civil war inside the organization. And the next episode's official synopsis confirms just how serious that fallout becomes. Roarke and Sweeney's conflict splits the Westies, putting the old guard against the younger members. So when we look back at episode 7, the real story isn't just about who gets arrested. It is about trust. Who trusts Sweeney? Who trusts Roarke? Who trusts Keenan? Who trusts Bridget? And perhaps most importantly, who is being lied to? Because in a world like this, trust isn't friendship. Trust is survival. And once that trust disappears, everyone becomes a potential enemy. So the biggest takeaway from A Boy Made of Trouble is simple. The Westies have spent the entire season fighting to control Hell's Kitchen. But now, they are beginning to lose control of themselves. Sweeney's authority is being challenged. Roarke's ambition is growing. Keenan is getting closer. Polk is tightening the pressure. Flanagan's personal life is collapsing. And Bridget is discovering that the mission may not be what she thought it was. The walls are closing in, and there may be no way out. So the real question isn't whether the Westies can survive. The real question is, who will still be standing when the dust settles? And that is exactly why episode 7 is such an important turning point in the season. Because sometimes an empire doesn't fall when its enemies attack. Sometimes it falls when the people inside stop believing in each other.